Hello, and welcome to Writers Group Therapy.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Roshni. We're writers helping writers with whatever writing ailments you might have.
Whether it's related to your craft or your career, we can help.
Are you ready for your session?
The doctors are in. Today we have the multi-talented Rafael Casal with us. He is a producer, writer, actor, and the director of Blindspotting, the critically acclaimed Starz series. It was a winner of the South by Southwest Audience Choice Award and a nominee for Best New Scripted Series and Breakthrough Series. And it's based on the feature film Blindspotting, which he also wrote and was starred in. And that was nominated for Best Original Screenplay. Besides his writing, he is also a musical talent, which is featured in the show, as well as on the Apple TV animated series Central Park, which I really like. That's so cool. Didn't know he worked on that too. So welcome to the show, Rafael.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
No, we're really happy to have you. This is super cool. I got the screeners, and I got to say, I never saw the movie. I didn't see the first season, but now I'm an instant fan. This thing is hilarious, as well as, poignant and thoughtful and gritty at times. But before we get into the show and writing the show, we'd like to know a little bit about where our writers came from. So before you wrote Blindspotting, the feature film, what were you doing? How did you come to be a writer, and what drove you to then write Blindspotting?
I started as a poet, as a teen. I got really into performance poetry in the Bay Area where I grew up. I grew up in the East Bay between kind of Berkeley and Oakland, and there's a big sort of youth poetry scene there, and this is before Pro Tools was really readily accessible, or people had DSLR cameras. There wasn't a lot of technology or social media to sort of help along young people who wanted to be artists, and so these performance events were kind of the place to be. And so I kind of came up first performing poetry in front of crowds. And in the Bay Area, there are pretty significant crowds that'll come out for a poetry event. And so that was really kind of where I started, between that and doing a lot of music stuff as recording technology became more available to me. And then I went on this HBO show called Deaf Poetry, which was kind of capitalizing on the popularity of that scene. And I was still really young. I was 17, 18, 19. And that was kind of my window into being a writer, was short form poems and music. And then came the birth of YouTube, which was huge for people kind of in my age range of getting your work out there and getting other people to see it. And that made its way in front of who are now, 17 some odd years later. My main collaborators, Jess and Keith Calder, were scouring the internet for new kinds of writers to work on films. And I met them on the internet.
Wow. Yeah. You really were right at the right moment for the YouTube boom when that started. And I remember when YouTube was new and the rawness of all the video that was on there.
Yeah. I mean, those were the early days, right? Now YouTube videos have millions and millions of views. But back then, if you had 200,000 views on a video or 500,000 views on a video, the internet was smaller at that point. And so getting something to go viral meant that you could tour, you could gig all over the country. And so I was really, really early in putting poetry performances on YouTube. And there was only a handful of us doing it at the time. And so it really allowed me to get on the road young and tour for 6-7 years, kind of gigging on the university circuit and different venues all over the country and out of the country. And that was kind of where I earned my chops a bit. Wow.
And then how did you start screenwriting then? And then decide to write Blindspotting?
I got bullied into it, really. Jess who's is the producer, that the filmmaker that found me on YouTube, who I think she was just out of NYU herself. I think they'd done All the Boys Love Mandy Lane, and I think they'd just done this movie, The Whackness. And they came up to Oakland, and they took me out to lunch, and they started talking about whether or not I felt that poetry had a future in long form filmmaking, and I'd thought about it, but I'd never seen really many examples of it. I think the only one I'd really seen was the movie Slam that Saul Williams had done, which was really pivotal for me in my career at that point. And we started this long process of talking about if there was a way to do poetry in film, and they started handing me scripts to read, and I started going down to LA all the time and going to their events and hanging out in their offices and just kind of getting into this like sort of self-made masterclass with these two people who are already making movies on their own and were just a little bit older than me. Um, and that really piqued my curiosity on the idea of even making films for myself. I come from a family that loves film and television. It's a big part of our lives. Like that's what our family does for fun. We go to movies and we watch movies together, and we watch TV shows together, and we discuss intensely. But we do it really on the fan side. Like the Bay Area doesn't have or at the time didn't have a film scene like that. And so the idea of making a movie was so fantastical and far-fetched that I'd never considered it in realistic terms until they presented that to me.
Wow, that's so cool. So you really got your screenwriting education on the fly, like hands on working with these people.
Yeah, and I'm an obsessive learner, and so I am the right age where the internet came about right as my sort of curiosity in the arts came about, and so it was so easy all of a sudden the minute I had the curiosity to find every possible thing I could read about story structure and screenwriting and find videos of it's the first time you could find videos of directors talking about their process on the internet, and read articles about how people dissected this movie and how they felt about the turn of the protagonist at the top of the third act. But this level of information had never really been available to the casual observer before, and so I just took advantage of it.
Wow. So you wrote the feature,
I wrote
and
the feature with David Diggs, my main
right, I love
collaborator.
him. He's cool as heck. He's great on screen, and knowing that he's writing too, I'd love to have him on here too. But you guys obviously make a really good team. What's it like writing with a partner?
We started working on music together, and I think that dynamic really translated well to screenwriting. We're used to going into a room and not coming out until the morning and a few songs are done. And
Mm-hmm.
we know how to all play our part. Like I'm more the engineer, and I usually have an idea going in, and David knows how to elaborate on that idea and then pitch something kind of out of left field, and we'll take it from there. And sometimes we'll abandon the original idea in favor of the new thing. And we did that over and over and over again in different capacities for years and years in a band. And we released multiple like mixtapes and albums together. And you build this dynamic with somebody going on the road and performing your art for nobody and for tiny audiences. And it builds a collaborative dynamic that is really free of ego. And so then when you go into writing a long form script, you just kind of translate all those skill sets over and go, hey, we're not here worrying about legacy. We're not here worrying about who gets the most ideas into the thing. But we're just trying to make the movie. I mean, especially when you're working on your first screenplay, all you want to do is like make the movie you want to watch. It's like the purest moment of filmmaking, because after that, if you do well, you're suddenly in an industry where there's all these other expectations. But the first thing is so unbelievably unlikely to get made that you just want to make sure that you like it.
Yeah. Well, I hope you're still enjoying it, because you should be. You should be. What you're developing now, season 2, fantastic stuff. I mean, it's hilarious, but it's also dealing with some real issues. So I hope you're still enjoying writing.
Yeah, I mean, the enjoyment factor is always high. I mean, I because I take pages from how we came about, like I still make sure that I'm working with people that I have a deep collaborative relationship with, and our friends. We, our sort of internal motto is always dreams with friends. We're trying to make stories happen from people that we love in different capacities. But that's what the TV show is we got another crack at the same universe, but with a different cast. And we got to try out a bunch of new ideas that we had for this world that didn't fit in the film.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, you had all that, you wrote the feature film over a longer period of time. It was your project, your passion, and then you get the series. And then how was it transitioning to writing a show? and having to do multiple episodes and have long story arcs and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the great thing about coming into this, not thinking of, I didn't come up as this traditional sort of screenwriter objective where, I took those undergrad classes and I went for my master's at USC, and not that there's anything wrong with
Mm-hmm.
that. I know a lot of amazing people who come through that track, but I think because I came in from poetry and music and theater and like short form writing, screenwriting for film and for television is just like another framework. And so I don't know that I worry too much about the switching of the medium so much as like trying to master the function of what good storytelling is. And so when it went over to television, it was like, great, new medium, 26-page chunks instead of 94, instead of, a 3-minute song, instead of a 2-minute poem. And so it was just another challenge of form, but kind of all the same principles. And so it's fun. It's fun to play in a different sandbox with a lot of the same rules.
I think one of the things I see whenever I look at any of the promotional material for Blindspotting, whether it's the film or the TV show, it always says that you guys felt that Oakland wasn't really well represented in media, right? It's a kind of like a love letter in a way, like to present it better to the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think we come from a region that has very few narrative media representations of what it's like to live there. And I think
Hmm.
we had a little bit of a chip on our shoulder growing up that we would, so much of the canon of film that we would watch would be about Los Angeles or about New York or about Chicago or about Paris. And you grow up imagining what it would be like if there was a bunch of shows and movies about the place that you grew up and what that would look like. And so if you're a storyteller, you start thinking about that from the moment that you start identifying as someone who potentially could do that one day. And so I think a lot of people where we grew up have spent a lot of time imagining what that would look like. And I think what became really exciting for us with the television show was, we're trying to do it in one small slice, right? New York has 1,000,001 movies about it. The Bay Area could equally have an
Hmm.
incredible, like, catalog of stories about it. But we just wanted to tell another small one of ours the way that we see the place, and really hope that it encourages not just writers there to write more, and I think it will do that, but I think even more so to let big studios know that there's a lot of great stories to mine from the place that we grew up.
I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of references too in the TV show and the film that only people from that area would get. So how do you balance those like in the know nods with making it accessible to outsiders?
I don't even know how well we balance it. um, like I think we just do it. Like I it's important for me to always know who I'm making the show for. And the reality is like I'm making the show for me and David and our friends back home and our friends that work on it. And so we make the joke all the time on set that our jokes are for an audience of 10 people. And we're just going to fill it with as many as we want. And some of them really land, universal. And some of them go over people's heads because it's for people who know that neighborhood and know that store or know that restaurant. And that's fine for us. I think as long as there's enough universal jokes, any great piece of art, the more you dig, the more heart you find in the work. And I think we just try to make sure that the well of heart in the work is really deep. And so, we intuitively in the writer's room come up with jokes that everyone laughs at. And then we kind of try to give them a bit more specificity and a bit more specificity, because I do think people like being invited into niche worlds that they can kind of feel included in while they're watching the show. So I think we just try to manage as best we can, like what's the universal entry point, and then we just bring people all the way down into like, no, no, no. If you're going to watch the show, you're going to feel like one of our neighbors.
Cool. Speaking of balance, a little different balance. How do you balance all this? You have this stark contrast from this great, sometimes absurd humor with some of the grittier reality stuff. You have the issue with Miles is in prison and the disagreement between Ashley and Miles's mother about who's going to visit him and that kind of stuff. I mean, those are some pretty dark, serious things.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not particularly invested in the notion of like these clear binaries on television anymore. I
Hmm.
think we're just hanging on to this like old, when we talk about it, sometimes we talk about TV like we're watching it, flipping the channels in the 90s. Like that's over. The attention span of a viewer is completely different. The ability to deal with complex tonal changes in a show is like so much broader than it ever was. I mean, like this is the generation that is like going every 10-20 seconds is sliding their thumb up and going to a completely different tonal thing, and we're totally fine with it. And I think that's because life is like that. And so I just don't think we shy away from um, I don't think we shy away from how quickly a moment can switch on a dime in real life in the way that we portray it in the show. And so we can be laughing our heads off 1 minute, and then reality hits 30 seconds later, and the characters have to deal with that. And I don't know. I've never really experienced the tonal whiplash. I think it feels like my life,
It just feels real, huh?
to me at least. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that brings up a question. I was wondering, like, you break the fourth wall in the show, and we're always kind of cautioned of that as writers. But it seems like that's something you just feel like you want to bring the audience that close to the characters when you do that, and it's like you were just inviting us in to their problems and their life and their situation.
Yeah, I love a direct address to camera. I can't imagine I'll do it, you know, too much more in other projects, just for the fear of kind of what you're nodding at, is like we're all kind of I don't know, there's this perception that in some way it's a crutch or it's a weird convention to use, or I don't know, I find it one of the hardest things to pull off. To do it well is a really tricky tightrope, because there has to be a good reason to do it. Otherwise, it just feels like an excuse for exposition. But the moments when it's used most effectively, for me at least, has always been to draw a different kind of relationship with the audience in a way that the rest of the show can't do. And for us, um, our window in with Ashley is she's someone who doesn't have anyone she can be particularly honest with, because she's kind of having to keep it together, and so this relationship with the camera is also a vie for the sympathy of public opinion, and that's sort of the initial way that it's introduced to the audience. But the internal convention of her looking at camera and speaking in verse is her specifically trying to articulate in the most sympathetic way possible, which is what poetry tends to be able to do with including beautiful language, to be able to articulate how she's going through this troubling time dealing with her partner being incarcerated and trying to raise a 7-year-old, and writing these poems that hopefully he'll get to read later when he's older, to understand why his mother was acting the way she was acting when he was too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation. So I think when we put it in the context of these poems, are sort of letters to her future, her son's like future self, and the audience is then that person. I think it gave us a lot of purpose in, all right, she's going to turn to the camera when it's time to say something she can't say to anyone else, in a way that makes her feel as sympathetic as possible.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, we can't spoil it on here, but gosh, even just that first episode, very powerful, and there were some really, like, truly laugh out loud moments. Loved it. So, when you guys were shopping this TV show around, how did you decide on Stars as the best place to tell this story versus, like, a broadcast network like NBC or like Netflix or something like that?
I just don't think a broadcast network was going to let us be the kind of raw that the show would need, and I didn't want to have like a big sanitizing argument about this show for for mass consumption. I think it was always meant to be a pretty artsy show, and raw when it needs to be, and those are just fights I didn't want to have. But I also think um, Stars was ready to make the show. We pitched it around, and I think a show like this requires a lot of trust in me and David and in the other people involved, that we can pull off the things that we want to pull off, because a lot of it sounds pretty crazy on the page, especially in season 2. But at least we've earned a bit more trust with them at this point. But having a chorus of dancers and direct address to camera that's in verse, is risky business, and so I think Stars was on board with us, bought into us as artists, and also like wanted to do a season order. And that removed a lot of barriers for us. It allowed us to immediately go into writing a whole season so that people could understand the shape of what a season would look like. And so I think that trust was kind of the final reason we ended up at Starz. Also, um, they have Black women executives, and I'm not going to pretend like that didn't weigh into the decision. It did. I wanted to make sure that we had allies within the network, that had a relationship to the subject matter of the show and would fight for it. And when I and David and everyone met with them, we felt like they got the show on a personal level.
I think maybe your the fact that you come from a poetry background and have less industry experience, less screenwriting experience, gave you some freedom to do things that were unconventional and really kind of turn things upside down, but in a way that really works. That people, I think one of the things that drove me to it was that it was not the typical sitcom. It wasn't typical anything, and that constant energy and constant surprises were almost pulling you along in the story, and it really made it even more interesting.
I mean, that's great to hear.
Yeah, I saw in another interview you did. You had like a kind of a motto on set: energy up, expectations down.
Yeah,
What did that mean? Actually, I don't think you actually explained what that meant.
we've me and David have been saying that since we were in our early 20s, doing the shittiest live performances you can book as a band. And like, you can't worry about how small the audience is or how obscure the show is. The show's got to be energetic and fun. And so we would say it before we went on stage, energy up, expectations down. Don't go out there thinking you're gonna suddenly walk out to 1,000 people, or this, this festival that's here for something completely different is suddenly going to be like transformed when you start playing music. Go out there and put on a good show, and the people that it lands for, it'll land for. So I think that motto just kept carrying over into everything that we did. And I think that fluidity of medium has, to your point, has been really liberating. Like, I don't have an identity as a screenwriter, and I know a lot of people who do, like that. They have been pursuing an identity as a screenwriter for a long time. It gives them purpose. I have an identity as a writer, as someone who likes to use language to express myself, and screenwriting is one of many of the mediums in which that is possible. But I think then when I'm working on TV or film, I'm not sitting down going, all right, let me employ all of my skills as a screenwriter. I'm sitting down and going, let me employ all of my skills as an artist, as someone who understands what a live audience wants, and what people who love music need, and what people who need a good story require. And then that may, to your point, lead to some non-traditional choices that maybe have set us apart tonally from other writers.
Well, yeah, that, and I can tell just from the way you explain yourself is that you're very thoughtful in this whole thing, and it really means a lot to you. Which I guess is, I'm gonna kind of, this is a horrible segue, which kind of goes to how you spend a lot of your time helping develop the skills in others, where you've worked with Bars Workshop at the New York City Public Theater and the University of Wisconsin in Madison. You have something you set up there with the First Wave Undergraduate Arts Program. Can you talk about that and why you're so involved in that?
Yeah, I started with poetry at this nonprofit organization in the Bay called Youth Speaks, and I quickly joined that staff and started doing like assembly performances at other schools and teaching after school writing workshops. And it's all kind of about like passing the permission, right? Like, if you're getting celebrated for a thing, you should sit down with your contemporaries and especially other young people, and talk about what you figured out, even if you're not a master yet. And so in my late teens and early 20s, it was working with that nonprofit. And then through touring, a big thing that universities would want when you'd come and perform is they would want you to pair your performance with a workshop for university students to kind of give the how and why and demystify the process of the art that you do. And so for 5, 6, 7 years when I was touring, I was like going to a university, doing a show for 400 or 500 people. And then I was always doing like a workshop or a week of workshops in the English department or in the theater department. And that led to getting offered a job at University of Wisconsin-Madison, where they were trying to start up a contemporary theater, hip hop theater program for undergraduates that was a scholarship program. And so I moved out there for 3 years, and I built the second, third, and fourth year of that curriculum and refined the first year of the curriculum with a dance professor there named Chris Walker, who became a mentor for me. And so we built this sort of appendage curriculum program that went along with their undergrad studies that culminated in these theater performances at the end of the year. And so, undergrad students would take classes with me, mostly just in sort of in contemporary theater structure, but mostly in transferring short form performance poetry or music into long form. And so it was both like a process for me to learn to teach what I'd already learned up until that point, but also like you learn so much teaching other people what you know that it was also like a masterclass for me in sort of studying what does it mean to be a multidisciplinary artist that's trying to move across medium. And then when it came to years later, when I moved to New York, when David was kind of getting into Hamilton and it felt like the place to be, I went there and took that curriculum and took it to the public theater and sat down with Oscar Eustace and some of the staff there. And we talked about, hey, there's another boom happening in New York. It was sort of on the tails of the Hip Hop Theater Festival that had been going in New York for 20 years and in DC for 20 years, but had culminated in Hamilton becoming this big, focal point for people seeing the intersection of hip hop and theater. And so it felt like this great time to do a lab at the public theater that was about the intersection of verse and long form theater, which we'd been developing at UW-Madison for years and years before that at U Speaks. And so it just felt like a natural place to put together this program. And then we did that program at the public for 5 years, about 5, 6 years up until the pandemic hit.
Wow. Yeah. It seems like, because you mentioned that you were kind of dragged into the screenwriting and you come from this background of poetry and writing. And now what you're talking about, what you've done with the theaters and traveling and music, it just seems like you're kind, I don't want to say a free spirit, but sort of, I'm sure Starz is happy to have you working on the show, but where do you see yourself going with your stuff? Do you want to do theater? Do you want to do more music?
Yeah, I want to do all of it. I'm sitting here talking to you in front of my home studio where I have all the equipment I need in the world to do music, and it's also where I write, and it's also what like I love to do. I love to do theater. I think at the moment, television and film is the biggest door that's open, and it's the most unexplored terrain for me. I've spent a lot of time in the theater, and I've spent a lot of time in live performance. But this medium is really exciting to me. And we've done one film and we've done 2 seasons of a show, at least as a writer. As an actor, I've done other stuff, but as a writer, these have been the things that have been released. And then I've sold things as a writer that are either in development or, whatever. But this process of writing for a screen that's in the home, the homes of people all over the world is a different kind of size and scope of an audience that I think is still the Wild West frontier for me. And so I think I'm just trying to see what's possible across genre, across the machinations of form, right? 30-minute, hour long, hour and a half, 2 hour big blockbuster, hour and a half little, indie. These are all exciting possibilities.
No, it seems like you have such a positive attitude about just exploring what creativity brings to you and not forcing it. Like, a lot of writers like myself even are so focused on, the rules and the skills and the structure and that we lose sight of the art of it all. So I think you have a great perspective on that. Like a Lin-Manuel kind of thing. It's like you go where the art's taking you. It's kind of nice that way.
He and I and a lot of other people like us come from like artistic, like free spirited upbringings where like a lot of art was encouraged by the community that we're in. I'm from the Bay Area. Everybody's an artist. Everybody can do 5 things really, really well. And so that environment breeds a certain level of what I talk about a lot is like permission passing, that you see somebody do a thing or do multiple things well, and you go, well, if they can do that and they're just down the street, I want to try that. And so there's been a lot of that kind of encouragement in my life. And while like I am also obsessed with structure and I'm also obsessed with the rules, but so much of the artistic mediums that I participated in before this were about, and we say this all the time, right? Like you learn the rules to forget all the rules. And that's particularly true of
Yeah.
music. Music is a jam. So I'm going to learn all the different verse structures for rap music and for singing and all the chord progressions for producing. But like when we get in there, I'm not thinking about the rules. I'm trying to be free. I'm trying to be existing on the vibe of the song. And I think ultimately, watching a movie or watching television is not a structural experience. It's an emotional experience. And so we got to be free to like, here's a good example of it. If there's anybody listening who like deals with music, is like when you're making music, there's a screen in front of you and there's we're doing it right now. There's sound waves in front of us. We can either get obsessed with these sound waves and make music by a visual cue, or you do all that and then you have to like close your eyes and listen and make sure that the symmetry you spent so much time visually chasing is actually producing music that you like. And film is the same way. You can spend all this time staring at the scripts, but like at the end of the day, it's got to play and it's got to be fun and it's got to be entertaining and it's got to land in the genre that you want and have the desired effect. And so there is this like last step of letting all that shit go and turning yourself into the audience again and trying to make sure that it's landing the way that you want it to.
Very, very cool. Wow, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for talking to us. It's it's really great to put the writer's voice behind the stuff you see on screen, and truly unique person. I'm really glad we got to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I love talking shop.
On season 2 is now on Starz, so check out Blindspotting. Check out Writers Group Therapy online at WG Therapy on Twitter and Instagram, and writersgrouptherapy.com is our website. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.